Hi, I'm Chris Glover, the NDP critic for technology and innovation. Welcome to Tech Talks.
Welcome back to Tech Talks. Today we have Professor Michael Schutz from McMaster University, and he's going to tell us how we can save lives with sound. So welcome to Tech Talks, Professor Schutz.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing. Like, how is it that you save lives with sound?
Great question. Not too many percussionists end up doing projects that actually can save lives. So the immediate issue is that the sounds used in medical devices and hospitals are so problematically designed that they actually cause doctors and nurses to ignore the messages or sometimes turn them down so they can concentrate. And in some cases, this way of dealing with the alarms can actually lead to significant problems with patient care. For example, an FDA survey found that over a 4-year window, there were 566 deaths that were directly traceable to problems with the sounds.
So we've all been in hospitals. We hear those constant beepings, you know, a machine goes off and it's telling somebody something. And it's just, you're right, it is a really annoying sound. But you mentioned 566 deaths. How do those sounds actually contribute to deaths?
Great question. So part of the problem is that the alarms are designed in a way that they can be confusing and they can overlap with each other. So things that are really, really important can get covered up by things that aren't so important. And part of the problem is by calling them auditory alarms, we think they should be alarming. I mean, if a fire alarm goes off, it should grab your attention. But with the medical devices, there are really more ways of informing doctors about what's going on. And right now, the sound design is fairly crude, so it doesn't really differentiate between the really important and the lesser important messages.
And so is that the idea that, you know, you'll have less annoying sounds for, you know, and I understand it's just auditory information for people. So less annoying sounds for less urgent issues.
Yeah, so if you take a step back from the immediate alarm issue, which is somewhat easy for me because I don't have any medical training. My background is as a sound person. I'm a percussionist, and that's where I got these ideas.
And I'll let you in on this. You mentioned at the beginning you wanted me to refer to you as Professor Schutz because you didn't want to be mistaken as a doctor. Although you are a doctor, but you're sort of a doctor like Ross and Friends is a doctor.
Exactly. And in fact, when my mom learned about this research, she was so excited. She said, finally, now I can tell my friends you are the kind of doctor that helps people.
That's good. Okay.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah. Moms are always great.
Yeah, yeah. So the problem, if we step back from the immediate medical situation, just think about this in musical terms. Essentially, we have a problem of auditory communication. We want to have a mixture of messages that are transmitted concurrently that don't block each other, where you can clearly hear the things that are of interest. And if you think about that as a problem essentially of musical composition, this is the kind of thing that composers and conductors and performers have been dealing with for many, many generations. And so I'm not advocating that our ICU should sound like the Toronto Symphony. Like, you don't go to the hospital to have an enjoyable aesthetic experience. But I think there's lessons from the way composers construct music and the way designers build instruments that we can use to improve these sounds.
You know, why hasn't this happened before? Like, it just makes so much sense. Those horrible, annoying sounds. Somebody in some company is designing sounds. Why didn't they ever hire a musician before?
That's a great question. If anyone out there would like to, I can pass along my phone number.
Okay.
I think part of the problem is that the early days of these medical devices, they made fairly simplistic sounds because in the 50s, that's where our technology was. And I get if you're designing a device that does something important like breathing for someone or monitoring your heartbeat, then the sound it makes when something goes wrong is not really the focus of your attention. So I think it's just sort of stayed in the back burner and it hasn't been updated, even though our sound synthesis technology has grown incredibly.
Right. So give us a sense. So we know those annoying beeps, you know, that come from the machines. So give us a sense of what kind of sounds are you going to be replacing those with?
Sure. Well, I should say as a caveat, it's a long road to actually getting this implemented, which requires not just figuring out the science behind this, but looking at policy and regulation and addressing the way purchases happen in hospitals. So I see myself as contributing primarily on the scientific part. And right now I'm trying to also raise awareness of the things that we can do and the places that we can go with these sounds. Yeah. So if you'd like, I can play you a couple examples.
Sure, that'd be great. Let's see. So what on that audio file that you just shared, I can see the different notes, the different wave patterns of the different notes. And the one, the hospital one sounds really annoying, but it seems to be the same notes that you're playing on a keyboard or whatever it is. How is it that the same note can be annoying or really pleasant?
Great question. So it's the same melody, essentially, the same pitches and rhythms. And that's important because if you know the old, more annoying alarms, you'll recognize the new ones immediately, because we don't want our doctors to be confused, by the change in the messages. So the difference is just something that scientists call the amplitude envelope, or the temporal structure of the sound, which is really a fancy way of saying the shape. So you can see the shape of the sound that's more annoying is somewhat like a rectangle. It's got this long sustained period. And that's the same kind of shape that the trucks backing up, that sound kind of makes, or fire alarms make. Really, sounds that we tend to find really annoying. I think they're common because they're super easy. They're super simple to make. And they're also very common, believe it or not, in auditory research that's designed to understand how our brains process music. So the way I got involved in this whole issue is actually that as a musician, I find that almost offensive. And I've shown a number of ways in which the sort of research conclusions based on those annoying, what I call flat tones, don't actually generalize to more complex musical sounds.
Okay, so, and I hear what you're saying. So especially about the trucks, and I want to ask about that because the noise bylaw has been overridden during this pandemic, and there's a lot of construction going on in the riding of Spadina, Fort York. And people talk about the beeping from the trucks going all day long, starting at 6 in the morning, sometimes 11 o'clock at night. And it is a horrific sound. Is it possible, can you get the same reaction though? Obviously, if a truck is backing up, you want to alert everybody around that a truck is backing up. I'm sure that similar situations in a hospital, if somebody's heart stops, you want everybody to know the heart is stopped. Is there a way of alerting people without agitating their nervous system?
That's why we need more research on basic auditory perception.
Okay.
There might well be better ways of doing that with trucks. And I think as part of a long-term research question, that's a really fascinating thing to explore. But it's also important to recognize there's a big difference in function between things like the sound of a truck backing up or a fire alarm and these auditory alarms in medical devices. Mm-hmm. You could argue, well, I understand it's incredibly annoying when the truck backs up. That is the whole point of having that sound, is to get people to recognize it, take the immediate action of getting out of the path. The problem is that mindset gets carried over to these medical device sounds when we call them medical alarms. And then I think people feel like they should be annoying. And in isolation, that's fine. Because if you do an experiment, let's say you come into my lab, you sit in the sound booth and we do an experiment to see how quickly you can detect the sounds. The louder they are, the more annoying, the less likely you are to miss them. So it looks good from that perspective. But imagine you're a doctor, working an 18-hour shift in a hospital, surrounded by, many beds of patients. We know from surveys that each patient can generate hundreds of alarms per day, and that's per patient. So we have doctors and nurses surrounded by this beeping cacophony of awful sounds. And that does at least two things that are really problematic. One, it's awful for the healthcare providers who are already feeling burned out and overtaxed already. And two, it prevents patients from sleeping. And we know that breaking up that sleep actually impedes recovery. And so not only is it uncomfortable and unpleasant for patients, it actually adds cost to our overburdened medical system by extending patient care and patient recovery times.
Okay, so give us a sense. Let's have some samples of music. And I know you're a percussionist. You're in the faculty of music at McMaster University. And we were just talking about a band called Nexus, which is a famous, Toronto-based or U of T-based, I guess, percussion ensemble that's been playing for decades. I first was introduced to them in the 1980s when a roommate of mine was with them. You know what? It's absolutely fascinating. I am so thankful for what you're doing because I know even for all of us at some point in our lives are going to end up in the hospital. And my father was recently in the hospital and he could not sleep through the night because of all the alarms going off. And it's funny that, then we end up doing this interview on this. So let's take a moment to close this off. Can you just play us some sounds on the marimba?
Sure.
That is beautiful. That's so nice. Oh, I miss music.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael, so much for being here and for sharing this information with us. That, your project is really, really fascinating. And
thank you.
It's going to actually save some lives, which is pretty cool for a percussionist, I got to say.
Yeah. It's more than we tend to ascribe for as undergrad students. Yeah. Fantastic.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow me on social media, and we'll see you next week for more Tech Talks.